So when people hear about the indissolubility of marriage, which means that once a couple has vowed to one another that they will remain married from that day forward, and because marriage is considered to be a sign of Christ's deep and abiding love for his church, God's covenant love for his people, there's a recognition that God never separates from that love that he has for his people. So there becomes a question then of, can people really divorce? And what about divorce and remarriage? We know that in the scriptures, Jesus speaks of divorce and the bill of divorce that is sometimes granted in the Old Testament, and but Jesus says that that's not what was intended in the very first place. That again, as a man is joined to his wife, it's meant to be permanent. So that's what Jesus calls people to, and then also says that if a man were to leave his wife and marry another, it would be as if he was committing adultery with that person. So we do have that scriptural foundation, and it's on the basis of that the church sees that marriage is indissoluble, unless there is something that happens at the very beginning of marriage which vitiates or takes away that very vow that a couple would make to one another. And so that's where an annulment is based on that a person, for whatever reason, was not able to fulfill that vow because in the first place they didn't fully mean it, or they didn't completely understand it, or because for psychological reasons it was a couple was unable to live that out. And so in those instances, a person might divorce legally and separate, and then the church might declare that not to be a sacrament from the very beginning because they were unable they were not capable at the very beginning to enter into that vow. So there's that. But there's also a realization that sometimes marriages break down and a couple is really not able to live with one another. Now, in terms of the whole church, the universal church, because marriage is indissoluble, then there's a recognition that divorce really cannot happen as such. People might separate from one another, but and they may not live together any longer, but that marriage bond still exists between the two people. So some people do legally get divorced, and in certain countries separation doesn't work, and that's true in our own country here in the United States. That sometimes because of violence against a spouse, there has to not only be a separation, but there has to be a divorce. Or because it is so erratically broken down that two people cannot even live in separation. There's legal difficulties with all of that, and therefore they seek a divorce. It's important to recognize that when people do divorce from one another, that does not mean that they cannot receive the sacraments any longer. If a person is aware that their own sinfulness was something that led to that divorce, then the sacrament of reconciliation is present for them. If they realize then that there may be something that was missing from the very beginning of the married life, then they certainly can seek an annulment. But because one is divorced doesn't mean that one cannot receive communion. At one time, because, and this was back in the 1800s, because people were finding that as an easy solution to the difficulties of their marriage, the church said that any person that divorced and remarried would be excommunicated. Well, that ban of excommunication too has been lifted, and so people that are divorced and remarried without the sake of an annulment, still can be active in the church. The church just asks them not to receive communion until their marriage situation is resolved. So if a person is in that situation, then what they need to do is to approach a priest to see if they can resolve their marriage situation. Otherwise, the church would ask them to refrain from receiving the communion until that's resolved. Sometimes it may be resolved in a whole conscience solution, and that's something that a couple would have to seek out, again, with the help of someone in authority with regard to marriage. In other words, the marriage tribunal or a particular pastor and priest. But the whole idea of divorce and the difficulty the church has with divorce is because there's a recognition that marriage is indissoluble and that every couple should seek every means possible to help maintain their marriage relationship unless it is so broken down that the only way that they can approach it is through a legal divorce. Once again, that does not mean that a person cannot participate in church activities or cannot receive the Eucharist. And that's a very important message, because there are a number of people that think that just because they have gone through a divorce that they cannot participate in the church. The important thing, once again, is for all of us to pray for the sacredness of marriage and to pray for couples, especially those that are having trouble in their marriages, to pray for the strength that they may need to help come together again. There are a lot of, there's a number of ways of support for marriages in those situations, and Retrovi is one of those where a couple may take a look at their marriage again and see if they can't build it up once again. And then for those that are in marriages that just find that there's not a failure in it, it's just not going as well as it had been at one time, there's always Marriage Encounter and other kinds of supports for marriage, and certainly people should seek those out as well. But at any rate, we want to pray that couples in their married life can thrive and flourish and also can live out what they have vowed to live out, a permanent marriage.